welcome to day 8 of Ghost Story Advent. Woo! The most wonderful time of the year. Thank you very much to Shelley for coordinating everything again. You've done a wonderful job corralling us all so far. Thank you to Adam for hosting and putting this entire brand of madness every year into our lives. I've been really enjoying the stories so far, so I hope you all enjoy my slightly different selection of Could You Wear My Eyes by Kalamu Salaam. That might be pronounced Kalamu Salaam. I'm not 100% sure. I've looked it up and I've seen a couple of different ways of pronouncing it. I've heard a couple of different ways of pronouncing it. If anyone knows for sure, please do correct me in the comments. So a little bit of information about the author. Kalamu Salaam is a black man born in New Orleans in 1947, and that's very much influenced the kind of writing he does. He's a poet, he's an editor, he's a music producer, he's an arts administrator, and he's a huge social activist. A lot of his work seems to reflect themes of racial inequality. There's a sub-focus on feminism. He's done a lot of work promoting writing among the black community, particularly among black youths. He's the founder of a whole load of different groups. I've got them all written down here. He's senior partner of Bright Moments, which is a public relations firm. He's the founder of Word Band, which is a poetry performance group. He's a founder of NOMO, Literacy Society, and also something called Rungate Press, which focuses on lifting up the voices of black writers. He's written 7 books of poetry, he's written a play, he's won awards at Edinburgh Fringe, and yet he is someone that I'd never heard of before. I randomly picked up a book of ghost stories in Waterstones and just had a quick flick through the contents list. Now, when you pick up these kinds of anthologies, you always sort of expect there's going to be a heavy lean towards Victoriana and the sort of very early 1900s for ghost stories, particularly short stories, because the novel obviously tends to be a lot more popular nowadays. So modern ghost stories, well, I know they exist and I know I have read some. They don't tend to feature very heavily on Ghost Story Advent. So I particularly wanted to try and pick something from a more modern era. And I think Could You Wear My Eyes is a fantastic selection for that. It's a very, very short story. It takes 10, maybe 15 minutes at most to read. And it's about a woman who is telling the story of what happened to her husband after she had died. So she is the ghost. It's modern day. She dies in a drunk driving accident. She's hit by a drunk driver, not that she is the drunk driver. And she talks about how prior to her death, she and her husband had agreed that in the event of her demise, her eyeballs would be taken from her corpse and put into her husband, which at the time she saw as quite a romantic thing to do. You know, part of her would always be with him. How lovely. And then she watched on from the spirit world as he started to see with her eyes, which didn't just mean he was using the actual organ, which, you know, he was. It also meant that he was starting to experience the world as she had and started having like crossover experiences where he would see things from his own perspective, but would also have these feelings and emotions and memories, and sometimes even subconscious reactions that were how this unnamed wife would have experienced the exact same scenario. it's a really clever, quite dark exploration of the differences between how men and women see the world and experience the world, and the societal expectations of what a wife is supposed to be like. There is some quite graphic sexual content, so you know, if you're not prepared for that, there's nothing forced. Well, there's a discussion of how men sometimes ask for a specific sex act without using their words, and it's quite an eye-opening one, I would imagine, for people who maybe haven't experienced the world as someone who is socialised as a woman. Not being a man myself, having always been a woman, grown up as a woman, I immediately, while reading this story, sorry, that was my cat's tail, I immediately, while reading this story, connected with this woman and went, yeah, of course, this is the kind of things her husband is experiencing. So it would be very interesting to hear from people in the group who have grown up male, have experienced the world from a male perspective, to kind of see what they think and how they respond to the narrator, because she's not perfect, she is a biased narrator. She may be an unreliable narrator. I can only speak from my experiences being very similar to hers. But she's also quite a judgmental narrator. She makes certain assertions or certain assumptions about her husband throughout the story that, I mean, I know people that would verify those assumptions, and I also know that there are men out there who absolutely would not and would entirely get it in a way that her husband doesn't. So it's a very thinky short story. It's not just a bit of entertainment about the ghost of a woman watching her husband react to this sci-fi kind of transplant agreement that they've come to. It's not a nice story, and it ends very violently. But if you are okay with having your ghost story advent interrupted by something that hopefully may activate your social inequality boundaries, then I definitely recommend giving it a read. I'm going to actually include a reading of my own at the end of this video, so if you want to watch that, fantastic, stick around. If not, the link will be underneath this video in the group, or I know Shelley posted the links to this week's stories, so you can find it on there. And yeah, I'd love to hear people's thoughts and opinions. Enjoy. See you later. Merry Christmas, everybody. Bye. Could You Wear My Eyes by Kalamu Salaam. At first, Reggie wearing my eyes after I expired was beautiful. A sensitive, romantic gesture and an exhilarating experience. For him, there was the awe of seeing the familiar world turned new when viewed through my gaze, and through observing him I vicariously experienced the rich sweetness of visualising and savouring the significance of the recent past. I am a newcomer to the spirit world, so occasionally I miss the experience of earthly feelings, the sensations that came through my body when I had a body. I can't describe the all-encompassing, intricate interweave of spirit reality. Reality is such a funny word to use in talking about what many people believe is so unreal. I can't really convey to you the richness of the spirit world, nor what missing human feelings is like. I'm told eventually we permanently forget earth ways. Sort of like when we were born and forgot all those pre-birth months we spent gestating in our mother's womb. In fact, most of us even forget what it feels like to be a baby. Well, the spirit world is something like always being a baby, constant wonder and exploration. Reggie must have had an inkling of the immensity of the fourth dimension, which is as good a name as any for the spirit world. Or maybe Reggie guessed that there was a meta-reality, or intuited that there was more to eyes than simply seeing in the physical sense. But then again, he probably didn't intuit that this realm exists, because, like most men, centering on his intuition was difficult for Reggie, as difficult as lighting a match in a storm or imagining being a woman. In fact, his inability to adapt and cope with woman sight is why he's blind now. I was in his head, and I don't mean his memories. I mean literally checking his thoughts, each one existing with the briefness of a mayfly as Reg weighed the rationality of switching eyes. This was immediately following those 4.5 anaesthetised days I hung on while in the hospital after getting blindsided by a drunk driver a few blocks beyond Chinese Kitchen, where I had stopped to get some of their sweet and sour shrimp for our dinner. Through the whole ordeal, Reggie never wavered. 2 days after my death, and 1 day before the operation, Reginald woke up that Monday morning, confident as a tree planted by the water. Reggie felt that if he took on my eyes, then he would be able to have at least a part of me back in his life. He assumed that with my eyes he could maybe stop seeing me when he brushed, combed, and plaited Aisha's thick hair, or sat for over an hour daydreaming at her bedside while she slept, looking at our daughter but thinking of me. Or maybe once my chestnut-coloured pupils were in his head, then my demise wouldn't upset him so much. He'd have to bow his head like he was reverently praying when a woman jumps up in church to testify, like Sister Carol had done the day before, and has on a dress the same colour as the one I often wore. Reginald was so eager to make good as a husband and father, to redeem whatever he thought was lost because of the way he came up. I'm convinced he didn't really know me. He had this image, this ideal, and he wanted that in the worst way. Wanted a family, a home, and I was the first woman he ever loved who ever loved him. All the rest had been girls still discovering themselves. We married. I had his child. And for him, everything was just the way it was supposed to be. For me? Well, let's just say some of us want more out of life, without ever really identifying what that more is, and certainly without ever attaining that more. So in a sense, I settled. That's the woman Reginald married. And in another sense, there was a part of me that remained restless. I hid that part from Reginald, but I always knew. I always knew me. And yes, that was what really disoriented Reginald. He loved me, and I could live with his love, but until he wore my eyes, he never got a glimpse of the other me. I used to think there was something wrong with me. I should have been totally happy. Of course I loved our daughter. I loved my husband. I could live with the life we had, but this is not about me. This is about the man whom I married. I married Reginald more because he loved me so much than because I loved him back like that. I mean, I loved him and all, but I would never have put his eyes into my head if he had been killed and I had been the one still alive. After we went through all the organ donation legal rigmarole, we actually celebrated with a late-night seafood dinner. That was about 8.5 months before Aisha was born. Just like getting married, the celebration was his idea, an idea I went along with, because I had no good reason not to, even though I had a vague distaste, a sort of uneasiness about the seriousness that Reginald invested into his blind allegiance to me. You know the discomfort you experience when you have 2 or 3 forkfuls left on your plate, and you don't feel like eating more, but you've always been taught not to waste food, so you eat that little bit more. Eating a few more morsels is no big thing, but nonetheless, forcing yourself leaves you feeling uneasy the rest of the evening. I can see how I was, how I hid some major parts of myself from Reginald, and how difficult I must have been to live with precisely because he didn't know the whole person he was living with. And he would be so sincerely worshipping that part of me that he envisioned as his wife, while inside I cringed, and he never knew that, despite my smiles, how sad I sometimes felt, because I knew he didn't know, and I knew I was concealing myself from him. Besides, what right did I have not to eat 2 little pieces of chicken, or not to go celebrate my husband's decision to dedicate his life to me? In hindsight, I came to realise I shouldn't have let him give me things I didn't want. Reginald would have died if he'd known that having or not having a baby didn't really make that much difference to me. He wanted. This is really not about me. When we went to celebrate our signing of the donation papers, I didn't know then that I was pregnant, but even if I had, we wouldn't have done anything differently. Stubborn Reginald had his mind made up, and at the time I allowed myself to be mesmerised by the sincerity and dedication of Reg's declaration. My husband's pledge to wear my eyes was unmatched by anything I had previously imagined or heard of. When somebody loves you like that, you're supposed to be happy, and if you aren't, well, then you just smile and well. I think when he saw the world through my eyes, he saw both me and the world in ways he never imagined. The doctors told Reginald there usually weren't any negative side effects, although in a rare case or two there were some unexplained hallucinations, but even for those patients, counselling smoothed out the transition. The first week after the operation went okay, and then the intermittent double visions started. For Reggie, it was like he had second sight. He saw what was there, but he also saw something else. Sometimes he would go places he never knew I went, and get a disorienting image flashing from a source about which he previously would never have given a second thought, like the svelte look of a waiter at a cafe, a guy whose sleek build I really admired. Reginald never envisioned me desiring some other man. I don't know why, but he just never thought of me fantasising sex with someone else, and now suddenly Reginald looks up from a menu and finds himself staring at a man's behind. Needless to say, such sightings were disconcerting, or like how the night I got drunk on tequila would flash back every time I saw limes. Reginald is in a supermarket, buying apples, and imagines himself retching. Well, he thinks he's imagining dry heaves, but he's really seeing the association of being drunk with those tart, green, lemon-shaped fruit. And on, till Reggie's afraid to go anywhere new, afraid he'll run into another man I made love to that he never knew about, like this person he saw in a bookstore one day, a bookstore Reginald never went in, but which I used to frequent. That's how I'd met Rashan. Reggie just happened to be passing the place, looked inside the big picture window, and immediately peeped Rashan. When he looked into the handsome obsidian of Rashan's face with its angular lines that resembled an elegant African mask, Reginald got the shock of his naive life. He didn't sleep for 2 whole days after that one. And when he closes our eyes to sleep, it's worse. A man should never know a woman's secret life. Men cannot stand so much reality. The fragile egos can't cope. It's like they say in Zimbabwe, men are children and women are mothers. Being a child is about innocence, about not knowing the realities that adults deal with every day. Men just don't know the world of women. So after Reginald adopted my eyes, you can imagine how often he found himself laying awake at night, staring into the dark, trying to make sense out of the complex images he was occasionally seeing, awakened by the terror of a particularly vivid dream in which he saw how he had treated me, sometimes abusing me when he actually thought he was loving me. Like when we would make mad love and he wanted me to suck him. He would never say anything, just shove my head down to his genitals. Sex didn't feel so exquisitively good to him to see his dick up close, the curl of his pubic hair. Although the major episodes kept him awake and eventually drove him down to the riverside, it was the unrelenting grind of daily life's thousands of tiny tortures that propelled poor Reg over the edge. Looked like every time he turned around in public he felt unsafe, felt vulnerable to assault from men he previously would never have bothered to notice. Seemed like my eyeball radar spotted potential invaders everywhere Reg looked. How to dodge that one, don't get on an elevator with this one, make sure there's always another person nearby when you're in a room with so-and-so. And even though as a man Reg was immune to much of the usual harassment, it became a real drag having to expend a ton of precautionary emotional energy in the course of taking a casual stroll down the block to buy some potato chips. The strain of always being on guard was too much for Reg. He became outraged. Nobody should have to live like this, is the conclusion he came to. He never knew when the second sight would kick in, and the visioning never lasted too long, but the incidents were always so viscerally jolting that they emotionally disoriented him. In less than 2 weeks it had reached the point that just looking at makeup made Reg sick. He unconsciously reacted to seeing some shades of lipstick by wetting his lips with his tongue, like there was something inappropriate about him having unpainted lips. A vague but powerful feeling that he was wrong for being like he was started to consume him, and he couldn't bear to watch cable anymore. The morning Reginald blinded himself. He stood on the levee, staring into the sun without squinting. Silent tears poured profusely down his cheeks. He kept saying he had always thought our life together was beautiful, and he never knew I had suffered so. And then he threw a 12-ounce glass, 3/4 full of battery acid, onto his face, directly into our unblinking eyes. The jogger that morning found Reginald on his knees, shrieking. The runner ran to a house and begged the people who lived there to call an ambulance for a black guy folded over on the levee, screaming about he didn't want to see anymore, couldn't stand to see anything else.